So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm not Jim Carrey, I'm not starring in The Truman Show, but with attendees joining from across so many time zones, I might just need his stamina. Thank you all for being here, and a special thank you to our esteemed speakers for navigating these time differences to share their insights with us today. My name is Gabriela Mocan. I'm the president of the Arts and Cultural Management Conference and your host for today. This event is the third in a series of online discussions leading up to this year's Arts and Cultural Management Conference, which will be held in Vienna between the 7th and the 9th of November. So it's just around the corner. Every year, the Arts and Cultural Management Conference brings together artists, cultural practitioners, scholars, and researchers, fostering a stimulating and cross-disciplinary dialogue on current matters. If you'd like to find out more about our events and be part of our thriving community, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and why not all the way to Vienna. Today, we are thrilled to have this opportunity to explore the intersections of culture, diplomacy, and artistic transgression in such great company. As part of these online sessions, it is our aim to bring some of the most exciting voices from outside of Europe closer to you in the digital space. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our speakers. In alphabetical order, Dorian Branea, Director of the Romanian Cultural Institute in New York, Uribe Sandoval, Senior Lecturer at the Erasmus School of History, Culture, and Communication in Rotterdam, and Catherine Wallace, specially appointed Associate Professor at the Hitotsubashi University Business School in Tokyo. These are, I have to say, their current and official titles, but of course, our speakers are much more than these simple titles. So behind all this, there's always a former diplomat, a writer, an author in different other fields hiding, and you will find out from themselves more about their activity. So I would like to start by encouraging you to share more about your activity, not only in cultural diplomacy, but your journey to cultural diplomacy and with cultural diplomacy. As we were talking earlier, cultural diplomacy these days has taken such a broad context, is covering such a broad context, and I don't think that we can strictly refer to cultural diplomacy as a state weapon, as a state action, as a state agenda. We have cultural diplomats in different sectors who are not only agents representing a state and the state's agenda, but of course, this is a very complicated discussion. Who actually has this right to entitle themselves as a cultural diplomat? So I will open the floor to all of you and start with this initial question. What is your experience with cultural diplomacy? What is cultural diplomacy for you? And how did you travel alongside and with cultural diplomacy in your careers? Catherine, if you'd like to start, maybe.
Sure, thanks, Gabriela. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. Cultural diplomacy is something I would define quite widely, and it encompasses all kinds of fields, not just what we traditionally think of as culture, but embraces how society operates as well, I believe. And for example, the mission of my business school, where I'm at the moment, is embracing complexity and achieving the best of two worlds by acting as a bridge between Japan and the globe. And in so many ways, that mission is played out at my school through aspects of cultural diplomacy. I myself, in some ways, act as a bridge between my country and other countries, as well as between sectors I've been involved in and other sectors. And I navigate a path that connects my background in government, diplomacy, and the academic world, as well as serving in that more geographical bridge capacity. My journey towards cultural diplomacy began quite a while ago, actually. One of the best and most successful and long-standing forms of cultural diplomacy that I've personally experienced and been involved in was the JET program, which is the Japan Exchange Teaching Program. It's a government-sponsored program set up by the Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, Sport. It's shortened as MEXT. And while my official role in that program was an assistant language teacher, or ALT, unofficially I was an ambassador for my country in that program. And during my time on the JET program, I found myself very often standing in front of disparate groups, from school children of all ages through to the local police, people from the city hall, and I would tell them about Australian life, society, and culture. And at that time, for most of the people in my audience, their images of Australia were fairly focused on things like kangaroos, koalas, and beaches. And so these presentations were actually a great opportunity for me to expand their views and understanding of Australia, to include things like the types of art and culture that we have, our technology, our innovation. And so that was my first experience of cultural diplomacy, and it was such an impactful experience for me that when I returned to Australia from the JET program, I decided I wanted to change the direction of my career up to that point. And I joined the Foreign Service in Australia, and that was the next step on a different type of cultural diplomacy that I was able to practice when I was actually stationed at the Australian Embassy in Tokyo for 4 years.
That's such an amazing story. Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing it with us. Our ways are not always known beforehand. As somebody famous used to say, we can only connect the dots looking forward, not backwards. Looking backwards, not forward. But yeah, it's wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. Shall we go ladies first? Anna?
Sure.
Thank you, Dorian. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you for the introduction too. Well, my name is Uribe Sandoval, and I'm currently based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. But as you might imagine, because of my name, I'm not born here, and actually also because of my accent to a certain degree. So I'm Mexican born and raised. And as a Mexican, I started my career in general as a journalist, as a cultural journalist when I was 18. And as I was navigating that part of journalism, I realized how difficult it was to define what culture was, right? So I was sitting sometimes in these meetings with my boss, with the editor, saying, okay, shall we cover this or not? Because this is popular culture. This is too much popular culture. This is not really the high culture that our magazine or our newspaper wants to deliver, right? And I was at that moment with this transition and saying, well, maybe, we need to be a little bit wider. We need to bring what is actually happening on the streets and recognize it and give it value by putting it on the media and saying, okay, this is as culturally valuable as anything else. And in a country like Mexico, that we have this very strong colonial view of what culture is, right? Indigenous cultures, for example, were not as valued as a more, let's say, Western or European perception of art. So that was kind of like my first introduction to it. In time, I kept on doing communication, and I moved from Mexico to Spain, where I also had like this very big clash on, okay, what does it mean to be a Mexican, right? And what does it mean to be a Mexican in a place where in theory I also belong to, but I'm not very sure like I belong to, right? So I was kind of raised, education in Latin America is quite Eurocentric. And we have this vision of, oh, well, this is what happens in Spain. There's everything. There's even language, right? And we have like this value of language, a Spanish language that comes from the motherland, right? And then you get to Spain and you realize that the Spanish that you speak sounds to them like old, right? Because we are like very careful with how we use language. And it is said by the Instituto Cervantes that the best Spanish in the world is spoken in Colombia and then in Mexico, because we have a sort of like more careful, approach to language, right? And for me, it was very interesting to reflect on how I was becoming a cultural diplomat. I would not call myself that at that time, but in being there, as Catherine was saying, right? Like in your interactions, in your daily interactions, trying to explain what was there about Mexico that was not drug dealings and narcos and things like that, right? So because you also have like this images that are there. Mm-hmm. So in time, I became a teacher. So I'm sorry I talk a lot because I'm a lecturer, so I have that in my heart. But becoming a teacher, I do teach now intercultural communication. And it's my passion, right? It's literally, I'm passionate about it. And I'm lucky to work also with Hans van der Berg. That was one of the speakers but couldn't make it today, unfortunately. But with Hans, we work in the Young Diplomat, starting this reflection that I had when I was 18 in the newspaper, saying, okay, what is culture? What can we present as culture? And who kind of, establishes this in order to bring it to other audiences? And I think I would like to, Gabriela, follow with this line because I think it's very relevant for all our colleagues and people that are here.
Mm-hmm. We definitely will. And actually, I would like to share some insights from the summer school that took part this summer, actually this year, which was organized by Hans, and we'll talk about that later. But you both, because both yourself, Anna, and Catherine spoke about language, linked cultural diplomacy to language, you reminded me something. Again, sadly, I don't remember the author, but I do remember the quote, which is very powerful, which says that you can speak somebody's language, but if you're not aware of the culture, you can make a fluent fool of yourself. So here we go, the connection between culture and language. And with this, I would just...
If I may, it's interesting because you touch on something that I think is also relevant, the idea of competence. Yeah. When am I culturally competent? Yeah. Is this an cultural issue language?
Yeah.
But because maybe it's beyond that, right?
Yes, exactly. Far beyond. Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah.
If I may make a comment on what you and Anna are talking about, I also teach intensive business writing at my school. And so that's very language focused and the meaning of words and how that's connected to culture. And it's a point that I make quite frequently to my students is that a lot of our interaction and the words that we select can have very specific cultural contexts. And if you don't understand those, then you can get quite lost. The meaning can be lost.
Lost in translation. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you to both. I would like to invite Dorian now to share something about his very rich experience in this field. He has quite a few years behind in the field of cultural diplomacy, pure cultural diplomacy. Dorian.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. We are on all these time zones. Gabriela, it's great to see each other again. Our cooperation goes back a long way. We were colleagues at one point in London. What a great time, and I remember fondly our cooperation. It is great to see that you are continuing your wonderful career as host, as manager, as cultural diplomat, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to talk to my fellow panelists, and I'm happy to share this panel with Catherine and Anna. It's wonderful to start your New York morning talking about cultural diplomacy, right? Your weekend talking about cultural diplomacy, usually making cultural diplomacy, because it's a perfect time, the weekends, perfect time for a certain type of events. And even, I think in a couple of hours, we have an event here in New York, in one of the sculpture parks of the city. We are supporting an event where a Romanian American artist is revealing one of his public works. But the topic of our conversation is something else than our work here in New York, but we will probably allude to that later. I just want to say that I like very much the question about, usually we talk about more theoretical aspects or more general things, but seldom have I had the opportunity to talk about my connection, my coming to cultural diplomacy. And reflecting on that, I would say that that my association with cultural diplomacy comes from three situations, I would say, three aspects. One is, it comes from a deficiency, from a serious deficiency. Also, it comes from a exasperation. And thirdly, it comes from a desire. The deficiency is the saddening situation that I'm not a poet or a writer or an artist to express my admiration, my love for Romanian culture, for Romanian language. And since I cannot do it this way, I found cultural diplomacy and promoting Romanian cultural language and values throughout the world as my form of overcoming this deficiency and being able to, with projects, with programs, with everything we do abroad, to show my love for this culture and this language. So this is a way of overcoming, to me, of overcoming a deficiency. Secondly, it was the exasperation. The exasperation that the Romanian culture, Romanian language are not known enough in the world, or are less known than they deserve. Also, it was the exasperation that sometimes we are misunderstood, or there are stereotypes of prejudices marring our image abroad. So cultural diplomacy to me was a way to address this exasperation, to try to correct this image that was sometimes distorted by these stereotypes and prejudices, and in general to make Romanian culture better known in places that people may have not heard about our writers, about filmmakers, about our visual artists, and so on. And thirdly, I came to cultural diplomacy because of a desire, and that was the desire to serve. When you are young, you can pick up several possible careers. You can go into academia, for instance. If you are bookish, I was not, so probably wasn't necessarily for me. But at one point, it was an opportunity. It was a possibility. You can go into private sector and make tons of money and have big, beautiful houses in the suburb. It wasn't for me, and it's not for me today, because I'm not very much interested in these things. And it was the government, the public sector, where you can really serve. You can do something that is beyond yourself. It's a mission that that includes you, that it transcends your interests, your desires, your preoccupations. It's something bigger than you, and you really feel you can make a difference. And to me, that was very, very exciting. And at a very early age, practically immediately after I graduated from the university, I joined the government, first in the regional administration, cutting my teeth at the local level, but working on international programs, and was a fantastic school for me, an experience, and later moving to cultural diplomacy. So 3 aspects: desire, deficiency, and exasperation. I think now, looking back, as you said, Gabriela, we must take a step back, to look back to our past. And to me, it's been almost 20 years since I've been doing it. Looking back, I would say that I am where I am, and I'm doing, the best profession in the world, I must say. I just love every day of my time doing cultural diplomacy and projects abroad and so on. It's been a luck of my life, but it's also based on these 3 feelings, I would say, these powerful feelings that drove me towards it, and supports my daily effort, and makes me go to my office every day, week or weekend, with a big smile on my face.
Thank you so much, Dorian. And Dorian hasn't shared this with all of you, but I will do it for him. I have to say that he's the longest standing director of the Romanian Cultural Institute in our network. He was director of the Romanian Cultural Institute in Warsaw, in London, when we worked together, and currently leading the Romanian Cultural Institute in New York. And as I said, in private, not publicly, but I will repeat it very briefly, that's how it started for me, since we are all confessing how this journey started for each of us. For me, from the outside in, not from the inside out, as a great lover of everything related to art and culture, and as an avid consumer of every single show or exhibition or event that I could get my eyes and my heart and my hands on, to arriving in London and starting to work with Dorian for quite some years, some good years, and learning from the best. So thank you again.
And I am totally envious, Gabriela, because you have joined the team of RCI London, Romanian Cultural Institute in London. You are at home in London, and you have done fantastic things within and without the Romanian Cultural Institute. But now you have rejoined the team in London, which makes me very, very envious. But I'm very happy for them, because they have reunited with a fantastic, brilliant cultural diplomat.
Thank you, Dorian. But obviously, this is not about me. So I want to return the focus to you, and to focus a little bit, because I really find this fantastic. Catherine, you're an Australian living in Japan. Anna, you're Spanish-Brazilian living in Rotterdam, so Europe. Dorian is Romanian and lived in Europe and currently in the US. So we are all foreigners wherever we go. Sometimes we are foreigners for ourselves, why not? So I would like you to think a little bit about the practical sides of cultural diplomacy and share with us a few examples of approaches, regional approaches, why not? Because cultural diplomacy may mean one thing in Tokyo, another thing in New York, and a totally different thing in Europe, if we put it in very broad terms. But obviously from regional, global, continental to local, from a macro level to a micro level, we can maybe think about some practical examples that you would like to share with us. How is cultural diplomacy done? Which are the priorities in the current geographical areas in which you are working? Please feel free to take the floor in whichever way you prefer.
Let's keep the order with Catherine.
Thank you.
I'm privileged to be male, right? Because I can I can point out this privilege of being the last.
So returning to my earlier point about how cultural diplomacy can be used to enhance, expand others' perceptions of countries, I very much resonate with the comments of Anna and Dorian about how people hold certain images of countries in their mind, and sometimes those are inaccurate or rather narrow. And so the approach of Australia in Japan, where I am, is to expand those perceptions while reinforcing the things that we know Japanese people love about our country and acting as good ambassadors in that way. We also want to introduce new things about our country. And so avenues that we use for cultural diplomacy, obviously there are events that happen through the embassy, but also through chambers of commerce, for example, and also larger events such as the World Expositions. So you may be aware that Japan will be hosting the World Exposition in Osaka next year from April through to October. And Australia has a large presence at these expos. We had a very large one while I was at the embassy. There was an exposition in Aichi Prefecture in 2005. And that pavilion that Australia had at that expo was styled around a particular theme that resonated, particularly with Japanese audiences. The theme was nature's wisdom. And it incorporated various aspects of Australian nature, Indigenous knowledge related to nature. And we actually had a mascot for that pavilion. It was a platypus. And there was a public competition where Japanese school children could enter and suggest a name for it. And the winning name was Kamone, which is a play on words in that the word for platypus in Japanese is kamanohashi, and also kamone is short for come on nature. So this was our mascot and ambassador for the pavilion. And this pavilion was very focused on enabling visitors to learn more about our approaches to things like environmental conservation, renewable energy, cultural heritage of Indigenous Australians. I recall that Anna said that sometimes people look at Indigenous culture as maybe not as good as the high art. So one of the aims of this pavilion was to broaden people's awareness of Indigenous culture, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on in a more specific context. But this pavilion had more than 1 million visitors over the 6 months of the expo, and it really helped to changed the way that people saw Australia, particularly the way Japanese people looked at Australia. And I think a lot of people learnt for the first time some of the things that Australia was doing in terms of environmental conservation, its energy technology, innovations in other areas, and perhaps introduce them to some lesser known artists and cultural people working in the cultural space that maybe are familiar to Australians but weren't so well known to the Japanese as well. So this is a particular format that seems to work well for our country in Japan, but it also works well in other countries as well in showcasing a much more comprehensive and complex view of Australia as a society.
Thank you so much, Catherine. You definitely, I'm sure you transported all of us into the exhibition space, and we were all imagining the setting and the mascot. Yeah, quite an exciting project, and it's amazing how much attention it attracted.
Mm. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Anna?
I had to think, well, Catherine was speaking a little bit of this international fairs, right, that have been a sort of staple of cultural diplomacy for, I would say, centuries now, right? So I lived in Barcelona for 12 years. So I was very well acquainted with Montjuic and everything that has to do with how the international fair, I think it was 1920 or 1910 that was built there. But I do remember very clearly the first times that I was in an international fair, right? I remember going to Zaragoza, I would say in 2007, maybe, or 8, and then walking through the pavilions and saying, okay, yeah, this is a good representation of a part of what is going on in the country, and probably very optimistic in a way, right? Like presenting these parts that we want the world to know. But how much are we talking also about all the kinds of pains, right? And compared to that, I go then to the Biennale, to the Contemporary Art Biennale in Venice that is now going, right? So, and it is very interesting if you think about the story of the Biennale, because at the very beginning, it was kind of like a, well, almost fascist invention of what really was art, right? And how it should be really seen. And now you see more and more this intention of certain countries to show art that is closer to the concerns of society in a more nuanced way, right? So I remember how it broke my heart, I would say 10 or 12 years ago, that I went there, and there was a piece in the Mexican pavilion of an artist that's called Teresa Matos, and she was using blood in water to clean the palazzo, right? And this was like a sign of like, this is how our country is. Like, this is what is happening in many places of the country. Now, is this making Mexico more attractive to visitors? No, probably not. But it is also telling about the story of the challenges that the country is going through. So I think this international fairs work quite well, but they at the end tend to portray a very optimistic view, right? As opposed to maybe the art biennale that I see as a little bit more critical in most cases, right? You can go there and then see some pieces that you think like, yeah, my friend, no, maybe not. You're not really talking about what is going on there, but it's interesting. And I wanted just to add one extra thing as to like far away from the exhibitions. And I don't know if you noticed, but I'm wearing skulls now, right?
Yes,
my earring.
I noticed that straight away.
And the reason why I'm doing that now is because we're very close to Dia de los Muertos, right? We're very close to Halloween, of course, but Mexico has a very strong tradition of what we call the Day of the Dead. That was a very familiar thing, like very inside, very close family, until one day the producers of James Bond decided to open one movie with a huge sequence in Mexico City with a parade on Dia de los Muertos. I have to check what is the name of the movie because I don't remember. The interesting thing is that that parade didn't exist before the James Bond movie. It was taking elements of culture. It was, of course, done with the government to try to portray Mexico in a different way, but it was made up for that specific event, right? So I always find it funny in the last 10 years with this James Bond and Coco, how easy it is for me, Coco from Disney. I don't know if you have seen, there's a movie for kids that is called Coco that is also about Dia de los Muertos. So how easy it is for me to explain this to some audiences. And still there's kind of like a exoticization of culture into, oh yes, this is how we are different, not so much how much we are similar, right? And how we can work together.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yes, definitely. This exoticism and making culture, turning culture into an exotic product can definitely lead to some other things, which are not always the happiest of the things, for sure. But definitely, yeah, very, very interesting examples. And what do we choose? Indeed, your question makes us reflect. What do we choose as a cultural product to represent a country? And you passed the ball to me, so I will get back once we hear from New York and Dorian about this. But I would like us to think a little bit about transgression after.
I very much like the Catherine's argument about making promoting an image that is more nuanced, more complex, promoting artists that are lesser known, even though, you know, each country is known for some things, you know, Australia, Romania, Mexico, you know, they are immediately create in our mind a sort of image with certain things that we like or know about or enjoy. But I like this, and I think we ought to strive in that direction to create this nuanced, complex, sophisticated, unusual, unexpected image of the country, and bring the bottom of the iceberg of these cultures, you know, traveling on the oceans of cultural diplomacy and of the international scenes with big bottoms, you know, totally unknown. Bring them to the surface and striving towards this sophisticated image. I like very much, and I think it's a very powerful concept. The concept that anchors the European cultural diplomacy is mutuality. That's the very concept in the center of our efforts, is mutuality. And mutuality means that you don't want to throw upon a society, upon a culture, your cultural products, your personalities, you know, your programs, inundating or trying to inundate a space, you know, with your proposals regarding of that of the real life and the real aspirations and the real objectives and interests of that particular destination of your cultural diplomacy programs. But instead, creating together from scratch programs, projects, events that are equally relevant, interesting, fundamental, are urgent for you as a cultural diplomat or as a cultural diplomacy program, and the country, the space you are operating in. So rather than a movement that says, okay, from your country and culture to that particular country and culture, regardless of anything else. And how I want to present an exhibition. I don't care, what that particular space may be interested in at a certain point. I want to show a certain film or do whatever we are doing in a sort of top-down, from us to them approach, rather than that. And we have found it to be the most successful, something that grows organically from cooperation and partnership, something that is thought together in partnership from the early ages of development. And this mutuality is really something that is not only, I don't know, a doctrine, an ideological concept, something, an ideal, but has proved to be very effective and impactful in the real life of cultural diplomacy. We jokingly say at the Romanian Cultural Institute in New York that we dislike very much Romanian projects. We dislike very much Romanian culture. We dislike very much Romanian cultural personalities. What we like the most is the Romanian international projects, the Romanian personalities working together or appearing on stage or developing a project, be it a concert, an exhibition, a theatrical performance. Just yesterday evening, we had a fantastic workshop theater show at the institute in our program, Romanian American Studio Theater, where you had the director was Romanian, the actors American, the playwright was Latin American. So all this combination, it was and grew there. They worked together 2 weeks in our institute to create this event. So it was a very international project. And that's what we like. I mean, we believe that our culture will be or the image or the interest will be enhanced when it's presented in projects that have been organically grown from scratch in the soil of American culture, in the real life of American cultural market. And when it's done together with partners, bringing various, various sensibilities, various visions, putting them together, melting them, intermingling them, which has proved so successful. And I think, because I do believe that cultural diplomacy is partnership, is collaboration, is coming together, and is mutuality. I do believe that this is the way to go forward now more than ever. And maybe I will have the occasion to talk about the way cultural diplomacy has been impacted and possibly transformed by the world we live in today. Because the world today is not the world where we lived when Gabriela and I were doing crazy projects in London and in the UK. So I don't know, 6, 7, 10 years ago. It's a totally different world, and probably cultural diplomacy must pay attention and adjust accordingly.
Thank you so much, Dorian. Yes, we will definitely most probably conclude with this, trying to map the world around us and see where does cultural diplomacy fit in this context and in the crazy times we are living. But before that, I would very much want to focus our attention on our topic for this year. The Arts and Cultural Management Conference has a different focus topic every year. And this year, as you already know, our topic is transgression and collaboration. So through this, we are very much trying to see which is the role of transgressive arts, of transgressing projects, how can we open the discussion, how can transgression lead to collaboration and not be seen as something negative. So linked to this, I would very much want to ask you, how do you think transgressive creativity, I would put it in a more generic term, this including art, culture, everything really, how can it shape diplomatic discourse? And we can take a different order as well. Dorian.
I think, you know, because the topic of the conference is transgression, when preparing for this conversation, I thought a lot about, you know, about the meaning of transgression and how it can resonate with what we do, the practice of cultural diplomacy, and probably the practice of diplomacy. But we are cultural diplomats, and let's stick to our guns, so to speak. Well, looking back at the art, especially the modern art and avant-garde art, it's all transgression, right? It's breaking the rules. It's bringing new perspectives. It's innovation and destroying or trying to destroy old ways of seeing life, of seeing society, and bringing new, fresh perspectives. So I would say that transgression is at the core of modern and contemporary art. Look around you. Come with me or you know, you can go in Japan or in Amsterdam or here in New York, in the galleries, in the museums, in the theaters, whatever, and you'll see a lot of transgression. You see that the transgression is somehow the rule of the game, because everything that is settled, that is norm, that is rule, tends in art to be overcome, to be negated, to be reinterpreted, if you want, so that we always have something new perspective, something original coming out. So I think cultural diplomacy, and it goes back to this nuanced approach to culture in general, should be very careful not to work with conventional things, not to work with, I don't know, sometimes narrow-minded or short-sighted or very safe aspects of one's culture or arts. But instead, it should look for something that might be a little bit disturbing, might be a little bit making us a little bit uncomfortable, making us a little bit inquisitive about our identities, about our relationship, about our position in the world as human beings, and about politics, yes, in general. So all these things, it's not giving some more spice to our programs, but also recognizing that true art and valuable art, truly valuable art, has always been transgressive, in the sense that it has always tried to progress towards new ways of understanding ourselves and understanding the world. And I think it's not only an option, but a sort of duty to find out these valuable transgressions, because maybe not all transgressions, you know, I mean, I'm talking about fertile transgressions. I'm talking about transgressions that really open our minds, not narrow our minds, bring us forward, not backwards, or in places that you don't want to be. These kind of transgressions, which I equate with originality, with authenticity, with daring, these are the bread and butter of a successful cultural diplomacy.
So it's very interesting, Dorian, that you should define transgression in those ways. It actually relates very well to the example that I'm going to use for Transgression Australian art. And during my time as a diplomat in the Australian Embassy in Tokyo, I saw and experienced the power of this transgressive approach to by a particular artist. But the very intriguing thing about it was that the artists themselves, I don't think would describe themselves as transgressive or were even aware that what they were doing was transgressive. They were being true to themselves as an artist, but what they came up with, what they produced in their work was something that really changed quite dramatically the way people viewed their field of art. And you may have heard of an artist called Emily Kame Ngaware. She's an Indigenous painter, and she basically lived in a tiny community in very, very remote outback Australia. And Indigenous communities, painters usually paint images from what they call their dreaming, which is their cultural touchstones related to their environment, their ancestors, particular animals in their area. And what mostly that results in is the ochre-coloured dot paintings. But in Emily's case, her art was completely different. It featured a lot of vibrant colours. And when people looked at her work, they wondered, wow, she must have been influenced by some of the great European Impressionists, maybe some abstract art from, Northern Hemisphere. Emily had never seen any of these works. She was so remote and cut off from the rest of Australian society. She was just doing what was inherent in her. She was expressing herself. And so this art, when it started to come out, people saw it. Her works were bought by the National Gallery of Australia, and it was decided that the Australian Embassy would bring a blockbuster exhibition of Emily's work to Tokyo. And when I first visited this exhibition, I was really quite impacted by it. The scale of the works, some of them were enormous. And I found myself going back to some of the works again and again and again to look at them. They were totally outside what I expected, what I knew Aboriginal art to be. And this completely different approach was very impactful in Tokyo. The exhibition attracted a much wider range of visitors, politicians, celebrities, even the then Crown Prince and Princess of Japan, which now the Emperor and Empress of Japan came, were very impressed by the exhibition. It became basically a must attend for anybody who was even remotely interested in art. And this exhibition really altered people's perceptions of Aboriginal art. They became more interested in, so what was the community like, the environment, the setting of the person that produced this art? And so through the medium of just a totally different transgressive style of Aboriginal art, people became more aware of the other artists that were in the community where Emily did her work, and it just really took things in a new direction for Aboriginal art and the opportunities for Aboriginal artists and opportunities for them to show their work, for people to be interested and purchase their work, etc. So it was a really powerful example of transgressive art.
Yep, and if I may, I would be curious, right, to see, but this is something that we probably cannot know. But what was the process in which we decide to bring this transgressive art to the forefront, which is something that for me is very interesting, right? If you look at like the few contexts that I have had with my embassy, right, or with my two embassies, the Spanish and the Mexican one, right? Sometimes when I go to the spaces and the events that they organize, I'm surrounded by very traditional people, right, that want to have a vision of culture that complies with certain standards and what is to a certain degree comfortable. And the idea of transgression, I can imagine that it can come as a will to expand the space of what art is, but I can also imagine that it comes as a will to make it more market attractive, right? And I have to think about the sensation exhibitions in London in the 90s, right? With all this in the new artists, the new British art coming in. And it was so attractive, and people were making lines because it was transgressive, because this was not art. Like, I'm not going to go and see a shark on plexiglass and see this as art. It's kind of like a different thing. So, and I always have like this discussion about, well, how much is this really a new appreciation of different kinds of art, or is the interest of making it a blockbuster, which is also perfectly fine, right? You need a market and you need people to be more engaged with it. But I kind of like navigate in between this curiosity as to how you manage to get some very traditional diplomats to join and say, okay, this is how we're going to do things. And to also combine the idea of the market that plays a very big role here, right? And it's a little bit talked about what Dorian was saying, and said like, okay, these people, when they're only Romanians making Romanians, like that, they are quite boring and probably not so attractive. I want them to be more into a different mix, right? So, and I find it like a big question for me. Like, do we use transgression as a means to be more commercially appealing? And I dare ask now Emma, right? Because I was looking at the website of your organization, right? And these ideas of like forward thinking. Is this also about making ideas more forward, or making it just more attractive to the market, which can also be?
I think part of the thinking behind the Emily exhibition, as it came to be known, was to introduce people in Japan to the concept of masterful works of art that weren't from Europe or America, or that basically Australia could do this kind of art exhibition as well. So I think it again fed into that desire to expand people's understanding of what Australia is, what its art and culture scene is like. And it's not just perhaps modern Australian versions of some of the contemporary types of art that we see and that people are familiar with in Europe and the Americas, but something that's very uniquely Australian, because it's Indigenous art, but not as you've experienced it before. So again, I think it was about expanding those kinds of perceptions and indicating that Australia is, I kind of hesitate to use the word player, but that Australia is active in this area, but not in a derivative way, but in something that's coming inherently from Australian society and Indigenous culture.
And there's not just one Australia, because it gives me the feeling that there can be so many different worlds within the same world. And the example that you gave, Catherine, is very much representing this. Anna's question is also quite an interesting question. What do we do with transgressive art? Do we just want to be very popular and do this for this specific aim? Or are we doing this for reasons that Dorian mentioned earlier? So I guess this is for all of us to ponder upon, to think about. I would very much want to invite our participants to ask their questions, but not yet, because I would like us to try and wrap it up with a question about the current times we are living in and the challenging times we are living in, and see how can we navigate these times, and what's the role of cultural diplomacy, and also who should be a cultural diplomat today, who should or can represent this field and culture and do it justice.
So what's our order now?
Whichever you prefer. It can be a discussion, an exchange. You don't have to really present your own opinions. It can even be a dialogue among yourselves. So
I wanted to talk a little bit about how this interacts with my current field of endeavour, which is academia. My school that I teach at is a really good example of how you can integrate cultural diplomacy into a program. And the cohort that we admit every year is very diverse. It's only 50 or 60 students, but they're drawn from over 20 different countries and regions. And they have widely varying career backgrounds as well. So not just from finance and consulting, but we also have architects, people from the arts, various kinds of arts. And our program incorporates a range of topics and activities that broaden awareness, understanding and practice of Japanese culture in particular, because we're in Japan and we find that our location is one of the reasons many students choose to come here. And students can experience things like the tea ceremony, they can experience Zen meditation, they can go to a cafe and be served by robots operated by people with physical disabilities. And they're also able to undertake independent research projects on things like culture. So a project that was done last year by a group of students, they worked with the Ohara Museum of Art on some various things that they were doing. And my school is also the representative school within a global network of 32 business schools, the only school in Japan. And as part of this, we have intense exchange weeks called Global Network Weeks. And the program that we host in Tokyo is called Omotenashi 4.0. And in that program, we introduce students to Japanese philosophy and the practice behind the world-class hospitality that people can experience when they come to Japan. And it includes taking them behind the scenes on field visits, some of the country's leading companies and organizations. And beyond these kinds of activities, which very often have cultural components, there are other things that our school does as well. We have an annual auction where students can donate particular experiences, including Japanese cultural experiences, which are very valuable. And we also meet every year as an alumni and current student body, where we can talk about topical issues, including what's happening in Japanese society and Japanese culture and those kinds of issues. So these kinds of activities are very, very successful in bringing people together despite their backgrounds, their different views. This is where I think cultural diplomacy is really important, because it's common ground for people to talk about things. They can shut out all of those different views on world issues, and they can come together on something that is more common to the human experience, I think. This can also connect to issues that are important to people around the world, regardless of where they're from, such as how is digitization and AI impacting our societies, and how can we make our activities in these disparate fields more sustainable. So cultural diplomacy can interact with those things as well to get people talking and get people collaborating as well. So I think it actually has a growing role in navigating our way through the very volatile, perhaps, and changing society that we're all dealing with.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And the universities definitely play a major part in this context, as you very well illustrated through the examples that you shared. So an agent for change and for good things. That's what universities can definitely do and be. Dorian, Anna?
I have a very non-academic example that might be interesting, like even though being an academic, but I live in Rotterdam. That is a port city, right? So it's one of the cities in the Netherlands that is more highly international, right? And they have in this moment of nationalisms, Rotterdam has a very particular identity trait in the Netherlands that it has been tested that people in Rotterdam feel themselves more Rotterdammers than Dutch, right? There's a sort of like local identity that has been created that is very strong, and that it allows people with foreign background to really feel part of the community here. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have been taking part of a project that is done with primary school teachers, not teachers, students. And we go to the schools, like what they do is they have a project that is called The Walls Have Ears. The Walls Have Ears, right? So they look for people that have a foreign background, like that they were maybe born in Rotterdam or they came here to live, but they were not third generation person living in Rotterdam. And they bring these people to the students who are trained to ask them about their story. How did they came to Rotterdam and how did they make Rotterdam their city? And there is like a long conversation with these kids that are around 10 and 12 years old. That sometimes is very difficult, right? Because they're very shy and they don't know what they want to ask you. But the conversation moves in a way that they start looking into food, looking into culture, looking into what you like in terms of color, right? And really creating this idea of every person being a diplomat of their own background at the same time that they are a diplomat to the city. Yeah. And the final presentations are always fantastic. Like I have been 3 times there, right? And this is people that came to the Netherlands flying from the Nazis, could be, or people that came from from Indonesia, people that came from the Caribbean islands, people that come here as refugees. And this kaleidoscope of realities in the city gives the children the notion of the idea of culture being something static and that you belong in is actually not completely right? So when the first image that came to my mind when Hans asked me to come with you, and also when I was talking with Gabriela, is this notion that we have of culture and how we have to expand it, right? And not to only put it either in the arts as to the arts with capital letters, or in the idea of this entity view of culture where we belong to this culture that is more a national situation than anything else. And I wanted to put it as a completely different example that I think is very relevant in creating this kind of threads in a community.
I like very much the both arguments of Catherine's and Anna's about the importance of diversity, of having a diverse environment and the various backgrounds and cultures coming together, and also of the direct contact, the immediate contact with somebody different. Those two things are, to me, very important, even crucial to cultural diplomacy. One-to-one contact with somebody that is different, that is alien, that is strange, maybe at first sight, but in creating this diverse environment where everybody, in fact, can grow from this experience, and and understand even more than understand that it's more than our street, it's more than our way of life, or more than our the way we dream or the way we speak. And these are not threatening. These different things are not threatening, are not negating who you are, but they can enhance who you are. They can enrich you. Your experience can be much nicer and richer on this earth by experiencing all these aspects. But I want to speak a little bit about the world we are living in and the responses of cultural diplomacy, because I think it's important. I have talked a little bit about it at the beginning of our conversation, saying that the world of 10 years ago it's totally different than the world we live today. And what we see is something that will definitely and should and will and is impacting cultural diplomacy. We had a world of peace. It was general peace, more or less, with pockets of war, but peaceful nonetheless. The peace was pretty much everywhere, on at least, on a larger scale, even though I don't want to deny the tragedies that have happened. It was still a world for many decades at peace. And now we see a world of war. We have war in Europe, close to central of Europe, and definitely close to my country, at the border of my country. We have a major war. You have war in the wider Middle East, and just today we read in the press that the war expanded as we speak, and you have in general conflict and discord all over. So you have a world of relative peace turning to a world of wars, of growing military confrontations, hot wars, military confrontation, not cold wars, as unfortunately they have always been. You had a world of cooperation and partnership. That was the idea that embodied the post-Second World War order: cooperation, partnership, coming together. And more we see a world of discord, of tensions, of divides that are growing and deepen every day. You had the world of rule-based international society, of a regulation that we all must obey. And now we have more and more a world of brute force, of military force, of intervening military and not trying to negotiate things, where diplomacy as a way to solve these disputes that will always be around us and with us has transformed into a world of force, of deciding it by sheer brute force. You had the world of democracy as the absolute ideal, as undisputable best form of government. But more and more you see people and countries and leaders advocating for at least illiberal democracy, at most autocracies or sheer dictatorships. And the tendency is growing. And of course, you had the world of consensus as an ideal. The way we operate in government, in everything we do, is try to reach for a consensus, try to find a position that satisfies, probably not in absolute terms, but in relative terms, pretty much everybody, into a world of extreme polarization, political polarization, factions that cannot cooperate and they wouldn't cooperate, ideological polarization. People, groups don't talk to each other anymore. They wouldn't, they refuse it. Not, a world when they are seeking a consensus, a sort of understanding, albeit fragile in balance, but no, divide, polarization, totally turning their back to one another. And on top of it, you have the absolute disturbing, powerful force, disturbing force of technology, with the and Catherine, I was very happy to hear that was mentioning that the force of artificial intelligence and the way this powerful new technology is disturbing, is transforming our landscape. And of course, all this changed landscape, frightening landscape, full of tensions, full of change, full of unknown, is of course impacting cultural diplomacy, as it must, because you have you may see conflicts, a sort of conflicts growing in military terms, obviously, and we see them all around, and with the race of armament and arming race, growing exponentially. You have economic conflicts with blocks, trading blocks coming apart and not together, and raising tariffs, preparing for a different approach to international economic cooperation, with the sort of globalized world being affected by these changes. And you see, of course, what's happening in military terms, in military theaters, but also what we see, and this is, I think, relevant for us, is the sort of conflict and tensions and confrontation at the symbolic level, at the level of ideas, values, way of lives, visions about what good life should look like, not for a group, but for most of us, and ideally for everybody. So it's a world of conflict, a world of tension, a world of war, and cultural diplomacy cannot function properly in the way it was defined during the world of peace, of cooperation, of consensus, and of globalization of yesteryear. It should redefine the doctrine itself and its doctrine. It should act differently if it is to be relevant and impactful, as it has used to be, and it must find new ways to address the challenges of today. Because we, with our cultural diplomacy programs, with our international cultural cooperation programs, we are operating at this level of values, of the symbolical value, as we call it, of values, of symbols, of images, of mores, of way of lives, and we must defend that liberal order. I think the core mission of cultural diplomacies in the democratic world is to, apart from our specificities, apart from our particularities, we as our core mission, we must defend and promote and advocate for these democratic values of democracy, with all that means, in terms of the way we elect our leaders, the way we address, I don't know, problems like gender, like equality, like all these important matters, like poverty, all these important matters of today. So we must defend these values, these democratic values. We must define the rules, the regulations, the liberal order on which a long peace was based upon, and of course the images, the diversity, the transgressions, the innovations, the originality on which this fantastic art and the best in art was based. Those who are not others who are advocating for illiberal democracies or autocracy, for whatever, they are not in favor of an art that is transgressive, that is daring, that is innovative. They are for conventions. They are for sterile way of expressing oneself. Our art is so interesting, and it's so enhancing and enriching because it was daring, because it was innovative, because it was transgressive, and because it is transgressive and innovative and daring. And we must be prepared as cultural diplomats with our programs and events and partnerships and programs to defend that world. That is I believe, the core mission, the all-encompassing mission of cultural diplomacies, to defend that order, to defend that set of values, to defend that way of making art that define a world of peace and cooperation and partnership and diversity.
Thank you, Dorian.
May I just make a...
Yes, Catherine, we have time, I think, for just a quick comment, because I really want to open. I'm sure that our attendees have some questions for you.
Sure, I just wanted to add to that. I think cultural diplomacy really speaks to a deeper level of what it means to be human, and speaking to those commonalities that we share by virtue of being human, regardless of our cultural context.
Exactly, yes. And we are so grateful that all three of you joined us today from your different parts of the world. This is the beauty of it. This is the beauty of collaboration, of cooperation, of transgressing the digital and the borders with the help of the digital. Why not? So thank you again to all three of you. I want to say that none of this would have been possible if it hadn't been for our colleague Emma Gabor, present here, who is the lead coordinator of the Arts and Cultural Management Conference, the founder and director of the Salon de la Sagesse, which is the Austrian organization overlooking and nurturing the ACMC. So I would like to invite Emma now maybe to share her thoughts and ask a question.
Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful, insightful panel. I guess what I've been wondering all this while is I want to go back to the very beginning, because when you were speaking about your individual kind of journeys of how you got into cultural diplomacy, what I heard across, like, from all of you was that it was more like it chose you. It was kind of like a life calling, and you didn't choose it, it chose you. And I think I want to go more into that, and maybe what it means for you, what your purpose is within cultural diplomacy, and especially also relating it to our last point of discussion, what you see the world looking like in the next few decades with all the transformations that are going on and with all the rather terrible changes happening in our world right now. Maybe we can go again, start with Catherine.
I think, and this goes back to a point that was made earlier, I think, by Dorian, that it relates very much to my inherent desire to contribute to society. So I feel like I've been very privileged, very blessed to have certain experiences in terms of my upbringing, my education, my career so far. And I believe that I've had those experiences and that background to place me in a position where I can then contribute that in various fields to a range of people. And so I think this sense of contribution has been a driving force throughout. So maybe that's why I found cultural diplomacy, because it matches very well there. And how I can contribute and where I can contribute, that has changed over time. And it will continue to change because of how the environment around me is changing as well. So I can draw on some of those, maybe a different group of experiences or skills that I've developed over the years to contribute in an area where it's needed. So, for example, for me, that now looks like a global course where I teach students about ethical values. So all this, what Dorian was mentioning about values really resonated with me, because this is a foundational aspect of my course. And through this kind of teaching, I want to raise people's awareness of these issues, give them confidence that they have what is necessary to interact in this very fraught world, and to do something to fix some of those problems in collaboration with other people. And the environment in which I teach is super collaborative, because we're bringing in people literally from continents around the world. So yeah, cultural diplomacy did find me, but it was because it connected with something I already had. And I can continue to use that in an evolutionary way as I progress throughout my career.
And your message is so powerful for our community, because as you know, the ACMC is a community that has been created around and for the younger generations to provide support and encourage them to find the strength and the expertise to start a journey in the field of arts and culture, and why not cultural diplomacy. So that's very encouraging.
It's a wonderful mission.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Anna, Dorian, maybe you want to share some thoughts regarding Emma's question?
I didn't hear you. I was in the
I think Dorian was frozen. No.
Oh gosh, now I have to take these boots off.
Somebody, the microphone.
Oh my god,
They are so inspired by our conversation that they've started to debate some of the ideas that have been exposed here.
Yes, Anna, I think you're safe now. You can go.
No, it's okay. I'm glad like that no one actually interrupted me, because there was a moment I thought, okay, where are they coming from? This idea of cultural diplomacy finding us, I agree, Catherine, and I agree that it's like, but I have the feeling that for me, it was kind of an awakening to something that was already there, right? That it is not only a career, but it's a sort of a calling, right? That actually then treads into your life and is part of what you become passionate about, right? And the moment that you can be passionate about who you are and what has built you, the cultures that had built you, then you're able to express and bring them forward. And in this context that Dorian was talking about, I think this is fundamental, right? If we go back to tell people, look, we are not only the color of the passport that we hold, the border in which we live, this concept that was given to us as a sort of an identity that is not a set identity, it's an identity that will change. Some of us are more privileged than others, right? We have the privilege of mobility. And as Catherine, I have the privilege of teaching young people. I find it like every time that I can sit in front of a classroom of bachelor students or master students, and I can sit with them and say, look, culture is beyond what we have thought it was. And maybe it's the moment to like not only value what you bring with you to the table, right? That is also a different perspective, but also value what the others bring to the table. And with that perception, the idea of national borders and wars becomes even more strange, right? And like saying like, okay, I can understand that there are political and economical concerns about this, but this is not about the people. This is not about the cultures. It is not that my culture is less evolved than yours. If we recognize this idea of like we all bring things to the table, then we all become by default cultural diplomats, right? Cultural diplomats. Like it's a sort of like natural way of dealing. And if we can do this through the arts, if we can do this through transgression as understood as questioning, then it will be a great way to move forward, right? So, and grateful to have people like Emma and you, Gabriela, and Dorian and Catherine that do this also like at a structural level. But I have a 7-year-old, right? So one of my main concerns now as a cultural diplomat is my role as a mother. That in this household, his Dutch heritage and his Mexican heritage are as important. And in that playground, the Moroccan, Italian, French, Dutch heritage that is now here in this neighborhood are equally important, right? So if we give that balance, then I think this is part of the small or big part that we can do to avoid this vision of constant polarization, right? And, 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 like, well, to tread our realities in a different way.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yes, the mother as a cultural diplomat. That's very powerful.
I like very much the Emma's question. Thank you, Emma, for the question, because it allows me to sort of, in fact, the two questions, because they allows me to answer to both of them at the same time. One related to this idea, that is wonderful idea, that the profession, the calling, as Anna said, finds you, and not you are drawn towards it and you seek for it, but somehow you are, I don't know, found by this profession, and you are reinvented, so to speak, by it, or your true colors are revealed by exercising this profession. And also the state of the world and how the world will look like for the next, let's say, foreseeable future, years, possibly decades. I said that for me, and Catherine was underlining that idea in her intervention. I said that that I embraced this profession because I had this desire to serve. I had this urge to serve, and I think in the following years and decades, given the state the world is in, given this tension, these conflicts that will only deepen, they will not solve in the foreseeable future. It's going to be tougher and tougher, going to be more tensions and more tensions, more divisions and more divisions, more polarization and more polarization. Our desire to serve and to use our talents, our imagination, our energies to promote and defend these values that have that are responsible for creating the world of peace and cooperation and consensus. So our mission is enhanced by the world in which we live in, and not paradoxically decreased because the cannons, the sound of the cannons is heard and the arms are speaking now. No, on the contrary, our role and our mission is enhanced, and that's why, because this is a program devoted to young people, that's why I'm telling them, and I'm telling you, if you are watching and you're young people trying to figure out your I don't know, your place under the sun and the profession that you want to pursue. I'm telling you now, if you want to serve, if you want to defend democratic values of diversity, of daring, of innovation, of the way of life that has been conducive to all of this, now is the time to join cultural diplomacy services. Now is the time to getting involved in the public sector or in the private, in non-governmental sector, in these programs, because there will be nothing more enriching, nothing more pleasurable, nothing more important, and nothing will give you more the feeling that you are doing not only something right, but something important, urgent, necessary, and you really can change the world, than defending and protecting and promoting these values, these liberal values, the values of diversity, of democracy, of open-mindedness, of progress, of betterment, than this. So that's why I hope our conversation is not only a dialogue, a pleasant dialogue, a very rich dialogue, but also an invitation to these young people to understand what's at stake and join us in this effort.
Thank you so much, Dorian, and thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Anna. It was such a pleasure to listen to all three of you. Such a great joy for us all. I'm sure this dialogue will reach many viewers in the coming weeks and months and years. Why not? And I really hope that this invitation, which Dorian has launched to the younger generations, will really get to the right ears and will be taken forward in the right way and for a better world for all of us. Thank you again. I hope that our paths will cross again in one way or another. Do stay in touch and we will let you know when this conversation is live. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Do check what we are up to in the coming weeks. The conference is going to arrive in Vienna very, very soon. So yeah, stay tuned. Thank you again to everyone.